major Eastfield paper. Eastfield requires 5 papers. We've decided that we're going to have major and minor papers for you. The major ones will come in the form of crafted work that you take home and you refine and you revise, and we always start the process in class. And the smaller ones we count as in-class essays and other smaller writings, collections of journal writings and things like that. So Eastfield gives us some latitude to decide how we want to give you those 5 major writing assignments. The first one, however, needs to be directed towards this idea of personal responsibility. These papers we collect, send copies, whether digital or hard copy, over to Eastfield, and they collect them for their accreditation review happening this year. This has happened a couple times in the past with us when they've been under review, and we've had to do this, and this is another one of those years. So we can't also promise that this won't be the only paper we have to do that with, because there's a fall and a spring semester, and they usually, at least when we did it last time, required 1 for each. But they did promise us that if they did want us to do 1 for spring semester, we would know well in advance. Last time they told us in April, at the end of April, and people were getting out in the middle of May. So instead of the last 2 weeks just kind of cruising through Beowulf, they had to do this paper. You get the advantage of starting at the very beginning. They've moved this one to the beginning, and they've decided that for the fall, we'll turn this in for them. You might not get yours read by them, and you might. It's just they need a sample of all of our students' writings so that when the accreditors come by, they can say, can I see what your curriculum produces for your students? And we do this for our night classes as well. We submit a sample. Any questions over that? That's just kind of leveling out the importance of all this. What is personal responsibility? And how do we want to look at it? Obviously, personal responsibility is something subjective. However, we are only parts of a whole, and our responsibility is just not to ourselves, but in relation to the rest of the world. That's where we move, that's where we think, that's where we live. And so the thing that affects you might affect others. And in an attempt to have students understand not just empathy and sympathy, but what they are required to do in situations where they feel they need to do something, and how do they know what situation that might be? How do you know when your personal responsibility ends here or ends over here? And the purpose of this paper is to try to gauge your sense of personal responsibility in a given situation. And so, unlike a narrative scenario that you think, oh, I can read the scenario and try to figure it out, there's a level of difficulty involved because the scenario is in a picture. So you're trying to analyze image and discuss your personal responsibility in the experience you see on that image. Any questions? Okay, so visual analysis. All this will be on Blackboard too. Basically, these are the things that we're looking for Eastfield College as we're talking about not just what is our personal responsibility, but what process do we undergo in order to make that decision. And as you know from The Alchemist, that you make one decision and the effect of that is not the end of that decision. That the end comes months, years, decades later sometimes, because that decision took you on a path. Right? So Santiago described that mighty river, or that current that takes you to a place unknown, and you have no idea where you're going to end up, but you know, if you reflect, that it because you chose yes instead of no, right instead of left, up instead of down, to ignore or to engage. And so that's where personal responsibility comes in. The engaging or ignoring defines your limitations. And analyzing this visual helps us discuss the ethical choices involved, how those ethical choices prompt our decisions, which are actions that we take based on the way we perceive the event. And that's how we create are one step to the next in life. We see the experience around us, we analyze that experience quickly, dictates an action into our brain, whether we think is automatic or not, and then we proceed from there, which causes another action to be made and another because of the consequence that occurs after every action, right? Every action is an equal and opposite reaction. So what is the process that you undergo? That's part of the paper. These are the 3 levels that we're trying to hit. Determine the ethical choice that you're trying to make, describe the process that you're going through, and evaluate the consequences and what those consequences mean to you in the real 21st century world that you inhabit and that you live in and that you're trying to grow in. So basically, you're trying to address all 3 levels. Good? All right, let's move on. Almost there to the pictures. All right, so here are some of our objectives. You, as we like to argue, are going to choose a position, but you're going to evaluate both sides of that position. So when you argue for a point, you have to argue for a point. But your point is only as valid as you can support it and defend it against counter-arguments. So if I say this image presents a picture of the defilement of religion, and that the ethical choice needing to be made is X, I have to just as well be able to counter-argue the other side. And why would I need to counter-argue the yes that I said to a no?
Well, like when you understand the other person's point of view, it makes your own points stronger because you know what to look for.
That is exactly right. That is exactly, everybody hear that? Yeah, give that a big round of applause. That is exactly right. That understanding the other side enables you to better understand your position and modify it if it's necessary because you understand that maybe your position isn't as valid, or, as he was saying, make your position stronger because you argue against the counter-argument. So there's a reversal when we're talking about logical arguments where you present a counter-argument and then you reverse the counter-argument to support your idea. What Dr. Munzenheimer doesn't take into consideration in his thesis, and then you say, you know, you're like, this is valid, but what he doesn't consider is this. So there's a concession that what they say is valid, and then there's a reversal of that valid idea. So you got counter-argument, concession, reversal. That's to help you create that other side. Because if you can't see the other side, then you're not arguing from logic. You're arguing from passion, emotion. And that's not argument. That's not logic at all. Logic is a process, deductive or inductive, and part of that process involves counter-argument, concession, reversal. And in that way, after the reversal, like a judo move, you've pinned their argument and make them submit intellectually, which strengthens your thesis. Okay. I'll pause for a second just to make sure everybody understands that. And if there are any questions over that, please stop me at any moment. I'm not trying to run through this quickly, but I know you guys have lots of stuff that you need to do with this. So, all right, so what happens in the decision-making process? In this process, you're able to state a position on the issue with a more detailed explanation or response for that position, and you address objections to that position. So that's that decision-making process where you're trying to present both sides. Here's my ethical argument. Here's my decision. Here's another decision you can make. Here's the validity of that decision. Now here's why you couldn't do that, because it might be valid. However, he doesn't consider that 20 years ago a law came into effect that discounted blah, 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 whatever you're trying to invalidate. It is essential that you make that counter-argument in this paper. That's one of the requirements. So remember, counter-argument, concession, reversal. And that helps you with that decision-making idea. So that comes after you state your position. Your position is your position. That's what you're proving. And in order to do that, you make that concession. And you'll, Mr. Cannon listens to MSNBC a lot, and I listen to some news shows, but if you listen or watch any of the shows that have people with differing points of view, left or right or whatever, that the person who is secure in the knowledge of their position and understands it will concede something that the other person has said. And in that concession, it's not like I'm throwing away everything I said. It's that, you know what, you have a valid point, but the 30 other things you said around it are not. And so I'm going to give you that, but then I'm going to tell you why it's not going to help, because it's not strong enough to counteract what I'm saying. And instead of arguing by yelling, or arguing by slander, or by insult, you argue by conceding. And in that concession, that opens up a gap where they're now going to accept what you have to say as well. And in that gap, that's where you've got them. Because as soon as you can see it and they're like, oh wow, they do understand, then you turn the logic around on them. So that's that decision-making process. You understand why it's called a process now? Because if you just decided on one side, that's not a process at all. That's just you feeling something and deciding that's going to be it. The process comes when you take into consideration the other sides. Bless you. And the consequences. So when you are talking about consequences in your paper, you're trying to identify a level of consequence that shows some sophistication in your understanding of the complexity, whether social, political, religious, economic, that there are some complexities that affect the reality you live in, that there are real consequences to the decisions even you are making, and that you've already set all those up. So a consequence is just not a single idea and then that is the end. Oh, here's my consequence, because as I set it up at the beginning, a causal chain involves a series of cause and effect moments where there is a consequence to an action, but that might not be the consequence if you follow the causal chain. Does anybody play chess? So you know when you make a move, you're not making a move for the next move, you're making a move for 7 moves down the road. And in order to do that, you have to consider all of the logical possibilities and counter moves if you were to move this pawn here, should I move my knight over here? So there are all kinds of things that you see on the board that open up that gap that I was talking about, and you have to consider those. That's your decision-making process to understand the ultimate consequence of that single move, because the consequence is 7 moves later. So, you know, that's how you see chess masters, they play, and like the game just starts and he's like, check, and the guy's like, you got me. What? You guys have only made 3 moves. Because the other person sees all of the possibilities, and there is no way that they can counter that move without being reversed and checked again. So that happens in any intellectual activity we do when we spar with someone else in the classroom, intellectually, or with a professor. We're trying to consider not what we say as has an immediate effect, but what are they going to say to what we say so that I can already counter that in my initial statement to protect myself against the ultimate consequence. So think of consequences as not something that just exists right after your decision, but that the decision becomes because you've understood all the consequences. Chicken and the egg kind of thing. You can only understand the consequences if you've understood the process that you're going through. And you can only understand the process if you can project the counter arguments. Okay. Logic doesn't seem very logical, does it? All right, visual elements. This is the tough part. The writing is the easy part. The thinking is the harder part. So when we analyze a visual object, we have a language of that analysis. Just like when we analyze narrative text, there's a language to analyze text. We know the techniques that the author uses. We understand the technical language of symbol, metaphor, simile, personification, all the figurative elements, as well as the narrative elements. Image, film, the visual, they all have their own language as well. And when you analyze that language, you analyze that piece, you're trying to use that language. So, for instance, we're going to see pictures. So a picture, a single image, is a manipulated shot by the photographer, the perceiver, and they're trying to show you what they see at that moment. And I say it's manipulated not because they walked over to the subject and said, okay, I want you to sit over here and I want you to come up over here. It's manipulated because they focus the camera in a certain way, or use a certain lens to gaze, to give distance or to bring you close up. The perspective of the shot is done in a way to give you a connection. Are you above the subjects? Are you at eye level with the subjects? Are you left of the subjects? Are you right of the subjects? Are you even so that you're standing on the same level and you're feet away, or are you yards away, or in whatever? So the idea that, oh, it's just an image and this is what it means, that's not the process that you want to evaluate in order to come upon an ethical decision, because the image presents many problems to a viewer. Because one man's riot is another man's rebellion. If you see good in the world, then you see things as bad. Right? If you distrust people, then they will become distrustful. So that the opposite of what you think you see could be as true as what you think. Which brings us to the decision-making process and the consequences. It all feeds together. So you have to evaluate that image, not based on what you feel, but on the language of that image. How many people are in the shot? How many non-people? How many objects of nature? How many man-made objects? Natural or otherwise? Then ask yourself, why are they in there? Just the guy had a camera and wanted to get a shot? Or, like an op-ed piece, it's a commentary. If you see it as the first, it's just a shot, he's just got to send something in to make his deadline, it's going to be a short paper for you. There are no ethical decisions in that. That's a random experience. But if you see it as a moment of manipulation, where he is perceiving something and wants you to try to perceive it in that way, not in the way you want to, but in the way he wants you to, that will make a bigger, better paper. And it'll give you an understanding of what there is. So the next slide, 8 slides, will show you images that Eastfield wants us to see, and they're familiar to some maybe. You've seen them before, and others you might not have seen. You know how we get sometimes when we analyze text, right? That everything means something. Oh, that piece of sand that fell out of Santiago's shoe. That's his desire for life, slowly seeping from his soul, the soul of his shoe. No, probably not. And it sounds made up, because it is. But when you look at these slides, there's so little there for you to take in, because there's not language, it's image. And any language we have is just a description of a photographer and what it's called. You have to decide on the narrative. What is the narrative going on there? That's a still shot. That's a moment in the time of that experience. What do you think the narrative context around that is? That helps you come upon what the ethical dilemma might be. Because if you just see it as it's hard to describe, well, what is the dilemma? That's just a kid dressed in a Ku Klux Klan robe standing in front of a black police officer. I don't see a dilemma in that. But then you take in the context of what that means in America, race relations, relationships of power in America, and not just the political conservative and liberal viewpoints. So look at the people's faces, if there are people. If there aren't people, look at where the objects are in relation to the people. Because unless it's just a nature shot and there are people in it, they're focusing on the people and their relationship to the world around them. If it's just nature, it's your relationship to the world around you. But if you have a subject, that's that subject's relationship to everything around them. All right, ready? It's going to be fun. Here we go.
And then before he, go ahead, you can go to the first picture, but also he mentioned the language of visuals, start being able to incorporate them into the rough draft and final draft at some point, whether it's simple terms like foreground, background, etc., etc., and we'll help you with terms like that.
So, for instance, we see this one, Mona Karen's two-part series entitled Utopia, Dystopia. So, same as I said, one person's riot is another person's rebellion. You could say the same thing about dystopia and utopia. One person's great America is another person's make America great again. But it's the same America. And we all live in that same space and inhabit that same time, but we see that America differently. If we look at this, Mona Kara, we see utopia, dystopia. This one is called dystopia. And we know the title. We know that we're supposed to see something related to dystopia, like a corruption of a pure vision of the power relationship between the people and their government. So, look and see what we have. What's the over? We'll just quickly walk through this. We have an arrow up and down. We have a person in a position of power up here, in a chair. We go down to the bottom. We have multiple people down here being subjugated by power, the tank. Here, he's on a phone. As we move down, we see policemen, so he's sheltered. We see policemen, we see riot-geared policemen, we see citizens in front of TVs with flowers and smiley faces and cars and ballot boxes. We see the military behind them. They are sheltered, snugly, in between those two forces of government power, the police and the military. He's sheltered behind the police. They're sheltered or contained, depending on your viewpoint, like maybe they don't want to be in there, between the police and the army. And then as we go down here, oil derricks, desolation, burnt out houses, bombed buildings, and men and women of various races and ethnicities in various dress, and the stark contrast between the color of these people and the color of these people is easy to see. If we filter from here down, that gives us one perception. If we try to go from here back up, that gives us another perception. What is the relationship between this and this? What is the relationship between this and this if we go the opposite way? Does it affect our relationship in the same way? Lack of power, does no power lead to this level right here? The people with no power? Does it lead to someone in ultimate power? Or if we're talking about something democratic, should there be this many layers of protection in between the people and the people in power? Or if we're not talking about a democratic idea, what is our ethical decision and what is our ethical choice? And you only can make that choice if you identify the problem. So we have a perspective. What's the perspective on this shot? We're looking at this as an image someone took with a camera.
Like all knowing, like
Right, you're omniscient, you're up high.
yeah.
You're viewing it from here. And as you look down, we can evenly see all of that, or we can zoom into one part, but the bulk of stuff is happening right in the middle. There's one person at the top, there's some people down here, there's a whole bunch of secure people right in the middle, oblivious, or maybe not, of what's going on in here. And we know that they're oblivious in some sense because of what they're viewing on TV. So is the media now on the power base to manipulate the minds of the individual, like the average citizen, so that they don't recognize the horrors of the world going on around, so that this stays secure? Because if we don't know and we're happy, and we don't know that we should be unhappy, then we're happy. We don't care about all of this, because that doesn't exist. We don't see it, because we're sheltered in between these forces of power that are controlled by that force. A number of ways to look at that, but there's definite ethical decisions you'd have to make. One, which side are you on? And then if you choose a side, why did you choose that side? And how do you know you're on that side? What are your own personal, ethical, moral values that put you in, or put you at one side of the barrier or the other, or in the middle of that barrier? Okay, so next we have Will Counts' Scream, image of the Little Rock Nine. It's a really popular image. And right away, we have a perspective on this shot. What is our perspective? It's like the point of view of the author of the novel.
Like level with him, like the person.
You're like there with
Yeah, it's like I'm standing right here. Like I'm in the crowd. Like I am a part of this experience. I'm not separate from, when I view it, I'm a part of it. Standing right next to the person who's being yelled at and belittled and harassed. Very good. So what else do we see in the faces around?
everyone else is like happy in the background.
Yeah, so we see that she's smiling for some reason. Maybe she's got a note from a boyfriend or something. We don't know. But we only assume, what is the context of the shot? Well, if she is coming to school and desegregating a school for the first time, and we historically know what happens after this, and all these people are coming, either filing into school or there specifically to harass her, she seemed really happy about either being there to harass her or just being there, period. It's hard to decide, but that's something you have to decide. She's pretty, that's easy.
Angry.
Yeah. And it's called The Scream. And I think if we look at the shot, and we're right here, what is right in the middle of that shot, and a space away, in contrast, is the woman screaming, the young girl. So we have an African American woman dressed in white, sunglasses on, calm, collected, I'm sure scared, but does not show it. She just wants to go to school, and in fact, we know that her parents are telling her this is something that she has to do, but she wants to do it anyway. She's given a couple of interviews on that. And knowing the consequences, already being threatened, crosses burned, etc., etc. So if we see the contrast here, we have her dressed in white, a sense of that not being defiled or soiled, right? It's clean white. And we have a white woman who is trying to defile and soil someone else. So the use of color, even in black and white, is pretty apparent. And then we have a host of men and a woman who, I don't know what her problem is, what she's doing over there. But we have a lot of men in the background. Some are smiling. This guy is not having any of it. These are students. So what are the men in the background? What is their role in this? Do you think they're concerned whether she's going into school or not?
Yeah, they're probably mad.
What's that?
They're probably like mad, right?
Yeah, I think some of them are probably mad. Some of them are probably mad because maybe some of them were raised by this guy, or they're connected to that woman. And then maybe if they weren't, maybe they wouldn't be so mad. Is it the influence that we grew up with that dictate our moral and ethical values? Or do we come upon those ourselves based on our experience in the world? And racism is a really difficult thing to parse out because it is learned, mainly, and it is something that you can come upon all on your own as well. But we do know that we teach racism to our children, both in movies and image and the way we interact, our political system, where we live, who we're able to sell houses to. Oh, yeah, I'm not going to go through all, I'm not going to detail everything, but I'll just point out a few things in all these. This is one of my favorite photos, Malcolm Brown's The Burning Monk. And this is a powerful photo. It has a lot going on in there. And what is our perspective? What's our point of view?
More like
What's that?
We're watching it happen.
We're watching it happen. Now, we are not where they are, because that's far. I mean, the distance is pretty far. We're somewhat closer. And we're not up here. We're not directly in front. Right? We kind of got a little side angle going on here. So that's in the foreground. Man burning. Midground. Burnt out car. Another monk. In between that. Background. People walking around. Some looking, some not. And those people are dressed mainly in monk's robes, right here that you can see, but there are some in back of the monk's robes that are not monks, at least not in traditional garb. And so it's like that first image we saw, we had that line almost of protection between, the top and the bottom. In between this burning monk, we have monks kind of in a line, like keeping the other people out. We have another monk in between the midground and the foreground object, kind of assessing everything. And then everybody else just watching and milling about. No one jumping over there, trying to take a blanket and smack it out or anything. This is self-immolation, where you're destroying yourself through fire. And this was banned by the Chinese government, but is still a popular form of protest in a lot of countries who have authoritarian, autocratic governments. That the only way, and some people have survived this, by the way, and that the only way to show the people in power that you're serious is to show them that you're willing to take your own life, and do it in such a horrific and dramatic way that not only they will take notice, but everyone around them and the world will take notice. And that way, maybe the problem can be solved. But it's at the cost of what you're willing to concede. You're going to pay that price. You're going to pay the price of your life so that the lives of others can be made better. And that's a really big sacrifice. So that's one way to look at this. Another way is self-immolation. What? Aren't there other ways? Write a letter, start a movement, Gandhi-esque hunger strike kind of thing. I'm sure that, so when you're thinking about this, you've got to know that they probably thought about that too. I don't think this is the first thing that you do when you're trying to protest. Let's see, should we make some signs? I've got some markers. You know what? No, I don't think that's going to be any good. Let's just burn ourselves in the middle of the street. I think that we'll start right off with that. So in no way can we think that this is something that he came to lightly. And in every way can we see that he is totally accepting, because his face is not in a position of pain or grimacing or screaming of any kind. In fact, we see him seated cross-legged as meditation style. His lips are slightly parted, his eyes are closed. And I want you to notice something about the fire. Because I saw this a couple of years ago when we did this, and I noticed it and asked someone else if they noticed it, but we'll see. So we have fire. We have monk. The monk, part of him is seen, part is being consumed by flame. If you notice, our fire is here, here, so here's the body, here's an arm embracing him, here's an eye, right there, here's a mouth, so if you look at where I've drawn, these are basically, here's a tongue licking out right there. Those are all the pieces of the flame, just kind of outline them. But this is a mouth, a tongue. He's being literally not just consumed by fire, that's what fire does, but the fire becomes an entity that is eating him and has already consumed half of his face, which is in darkness. And so, as the Chinese government has consumed their social and political and religious life. So, this fire that's just a seemingly a natural thing, force of nature, if you look at the picture, it's not just a force of nature, it actually looks like a creature. Now can you see the eye? Can you see the tongue? Can you see the arm? Embracing him, eating him, and he's just calmly sitting there, accepting what's coming, because he's already thought about that. He knew that the decision he was going to make, this was not the result of that decision. This was a way to get to the result, like to the end. All right, next, almost there. Dorothea Lange's The Dust Bowl, Mother. This was really popular during the 30s, and a lot of people went out. Dorothea Lange, among others, Steinbeck, did it in narrative form, but cataloged what was going on in the West and in America during a time of drought and hard economic conditions for a portion of the country, and a mass migration that caused. So here we have a mother. Where are we? What's our perspective?
Right there. Like
Right there. Yeah, we're like here. And this is really, because I've seen this picture a lot, and when I was telling people about this, I totally skipped over it, and then I kind of noticed it out of the corner of my eye. So we've got, she's in this fretful position. She's got that 1,000-mile stare that soldiers get when, you know, they're in battle or they're thinking about the battle. They're just like staring off in the distance. She's got the wrinkles around her eyes. You know, she's got wrinkles, arm, child, head tucked back, child, head tucked back, baby, tucked in her arms. Way down in the corner, almost completely encased in the blanket in her armpit, is the face of a baby. Doesn't seem like she even notices the baby is there, does it? Like, that baby is right there, looks comfortable enough. What are the body postures? Separated from the mother?
all like
Clinging desperately to the mother, as if this is the only stability that they have in their world. And this baby, who is not, is just, the mother is holding the baby, not clinging to the baby or somehow even recognizing the baby's there in this shot. This is the only perspective we have. Seems to go unnoticed and uncared for, as if the mother is at a point where even her own child, she can't really comprehend what she needs to do anymore in order to care for her children and have them survive. Like, she's done everything she can. She is at her limit, and she's just staring off in the distance, wondering, how is this going to, oh, not even if, are we going to survive, but when will we die, kind of thing. And the children, with their faces hidden, we don't see what they look like, we just know that they are part of the mother. And this is the famous Tiananmen Square, right before the massacre in Tiananmen Square. What we get to see and what we saw on TV was this, a line of tanks, like the power structure in the first the first shot. We had all those soldiers and tanks, and we have the lone man right here in front of them. And he's got a briefcase in his hand. And it's like he was going to lunch, walking across Tiananmen Square, and he saw all these tanks. He's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? This can't happen. And right behind him that we don't see are students protesting. And so he's standing in between the tanks and the students. And where are we standing? Above. Hovering above. Disconnected. And what happens, and Stu remembers this because it was on our TV in America, when this guy's standing in front of them and the tanks start to, these are Chinese citizens as well, and they don't want to run over someone, and a lot of those guys felt like students had a right to protest, but they just couldn't say anything. So the line of tanks go left, he shuffles left. Line of tanks go right, he shuffles right. And they're inching forward, but he's standing in front of them trying to move. Now, they could easily break out of line formation and go around him, but they don't. So it's a show of force.
There's actually footage that you can watch where he'll climb up on that first tank and open the parapet and actually talk to the man inside.
I was like,
Talk about a brave young man.
Well, don't you remember the students at Kent State when they stuck flowers into the
Rifles.
barrels of the soldiers who were there? I mean, that's Kent State during the protests in Vietnam, for Vietnam, war against Vietnam, where 4 students were shot by the National Guard. A lot of those students were trying to bring the National Guard members over their side. They put flowers in their barrels of their guns, saying, "No, come on, come on over to us. You know you don't want to do this." So this is not just his ethical decision, and he's committed to an act, but what is the decision that needs to be made based on the position that you see it, and what is the context of the action? Is it the context one man against the powerful? Is it the context of democratic rights over autocratic rights? Or is there something else more humanistic going on? Like Cantor said, where he climbs up, we don't get to see this, but later he climbs up. So this is a moment of defiance, yet he's not going to justify, he's going to try to do something to change. So he takes a stand on that ethical decision and commits an action. Ooh, oh, this is the tough one. This is the vulture and the baby. Kevin Carter. Right away, the perspective that we have is really disturbing. So where are we?
And we can see what the baby can't see.
Yeah, we're kind of down like this. Like, not totally ground level, but hunkered down, like this. And we know that because of the angle of the shot coming not from here, but from right here. And since he's on the ground, we've got to be down there, right, looking. So let's take a look at the perspective from that moment where we have foreground, midground, background. Ooh, shit. So, foreground, midground, background, and we are observing. So, what would you think are some of the elements of languages we've talked about for that image? One, just give me one.
He's cowering.
He's cowering. What about the vulture?
Stop hunting.
What's that?
It's like hunting.
Hovering. Interesting words. Cowering, hovering. Now, he's not dead yet, otherwise he'd be a meal. He's just waiting for him to die. Is that our ethical position? If we know this is going on, are we the vultures? Waiting for this kid to die because we feed off the, the dead flesh of people who don't matter or have no economic importance, no importance in terms of geography or relationships of culture, so that we're feeding on him as much as the vulture is going to feed on him to make ourselves more lively and enlivened and feel full, because we don't have to worry about that because it's not happening to us. So, but I think Kevin Carter tells us, no, we're right here, because this is the largest thing this is like right in the middle of our face. And then this last one, is this the last one?
No.
Okay. This is, don't deal with the text, just deal with the faces. And so we have two women, one with a hijab and the other without. Seemingly different women, different complexions, different shapes of eyes, different folds of the eyelid. So, yet they are similar in certain ways, right? They represent a type or a group of people that inhabit our world, all around us, everywhere. We see people in hijabs, or people with almond-shaped eyes and longer jaw lines and darker complexion. This kind of Semitic look of a desert-dwelling people. So what could be the ethical issue here? Could possibly be the ethical issue, two women standing there, without looking at the text. Where are the text boxes?
On my face, I don't know.
Over the mouth. Yep. What are the things that are wide?
Your eyes.
Eyes
Eyes. Where are the eyes looking?
at you.
Yeah. And what are they asking? The eyes. What are they asking? Just like the vulture is asking. What are you going to do about it? Oh, God, yeah. So this is taken during the Black Lives Matter protest movement, and like our first slide we saw, we have men in riot gear in positions of power. We have a lone individual, but it is a reversal of the lone individual we had before. This lone individual is not in a position of power, or is she in a position of power? Because one, it takes 50 or so men in riot gear with zip ties to constrain one woman. And certainly that's not all they're trying to constrain, but these two men, RoboCop gear, zip ties in hand, in motion. You see them in motion?
Mm-hmm.
And she's not. Passively standing there, like the guy in front of the tanks in Tiananmen Square, waiting for the consequence of their decision. They've made a decision. All these men, whether or not they want to be there, the decision was made for them. They might be pawns, they might not be, but we know that she is not struggling. They will zip tie her hands and cuff them and take her away, and she will go with them. The perspective is skewed because we see the line of power. We only see a few protesters standing out over here. So at first we can say, that's a little unequal, but there are more, you just can't see them. That's the manipulation of the shot. So when we deal with this, we deal with these elements to show the contrast, but our perspective is standing on the street with this happening in front of us. And she is not in battle gear, she's in a dress. And she is not walking or moving, she's standing still. And she already has her hands clasped in front of her, ready. Because she knows that's what's going to happen. Because in America, that's what we do. We can, when we're allowed to, we can protest as long as we're not violent and trying to kill people. That's our constitutional right. And somehow the power structure seems to be saying that this is not a protest, that this is a riot. And she's like, more like a rebellion. So you see that dichotomy, yeah.
Why was she arrested?
Because she was protesting.
But there were a lot of people protesting.
Yeah, she decided to stand out in the middle of the street and wait for the guys to come up to her because she was making a stand. Like all those people who go to the lunch counter that says no colors in the lunch counter, and they're like, you know what, we're gonna eat lunch. I don't care what you say. I'm gonna drink out of that fountain. Let's see what you do. So she's like, I'm gonna challenge this because this is a peaceful protest and we're allowed to have that. And I'm gonna get arrested and the world is gonna see what the power structure is doing. So the march of the against the 1%ers, remember that? I'm sure you guys remember that a few years back. Happened in Colorado, happened in New York, but each time the protest starts, and each time riot-geared police forces are called out and physically break up the protest because the power structure is saying, well, there was crime going on within the tent city where the protests were happening. That gives us the right to protect the people and break up the demonstration. So you see the gray area that we're playing with? It's like that first image. He's the power structure saying, you know what? Those people down there, they're disrupting and could cause harm to the people. We need to put a stop to the protest because it's now a rebellion. It's a riot. It's something that we have to do. So, the paper. So, primary source, you take the image. Whichever one you want. One, image. Secondary sources, 3 quotes. So you're trying to bring in research. This is a research paper. So one secondary comments on the historical, research the image, what's going on, what's the context. The other, the ethical issue, the dilemma. So you already know what the ethical issue is. This is the one you've come up with. You find a source to help you talk about that ethical issue, or, remember we said, counter-argue, concede, reverse and refute, right? A final secondary source commenting on the consequences. These are all things that you've already stated. The purpose of research is to support and extend your observations to help prove your point. It's not to make your observations, so don't let them make your point. Let them either help support it or extend it. And as you know, in our Dow composition style paper, evidence comes in certain places, research is shown in certain ways, introduced in fully, connected to your ideas, evidence provided, meaning associated. So it's the same structure as we always do and have done, but it's asking you to do specific types of research. Must be an historical context. Must be one on the ethical issues, and there must be one demonstrating consequences of the dilemma of those issues. All right, and structure, we basically broke it down. We want the artist's name, title of the work, ethical issue raised. 2 sentences that detail both sides of the ethical issue, so you present your side and then the possible counter-argument that you're going to refute later on.
Don't worry about getting all this text right here.
Yeah.
Later on today, when I have some free time,
Blackboard.
this will be posted. That way you also have the images, obviously. All right, so from here on, let him just go a little bit more quickly. That way I'll try to have time to post this video for period 3A.
Good.
So don't worry about this. It'll be posted.
Okay, so opening paragraph, artist name, title, ethical issue raised. What are both sides of that issue? That's the second couple of sentences. Focusing on your side of the issue, so you present both sides. You say, of these 2 sides, here's the side that I'm choosing. And then, what are the logical consequences? What is the point you're trying to prove based on this ethical issue? That taking this stance leads to this consequence which promotes this value. So you are trying to talk about your personal responsibility. That's the point. So what value does that choice have in the world for you? So the consequences, what is a stance you'll take based on your choice on the side of the ethical issue? Talking 6, maybe 7 sentences for your opening paragraph. You should be able to do this in 6 sentences. And then body paragraphs, 3, centered on ethical choices, decision-making, and consequences. And when you insert the 3 secondary quotes, where you insert those are up to you, but you need to have 1 secondary source per body paragraph. So the question is, what are about the other pieces of evidence in my body paragraph? Because am I just going to talk about that 1 source for 15 or 20 sentences? But no, because we've gone over the technical language of image and how the perspective that you look at, and foreground, midground, background, and so as you would in film, when you're trying to analyze film, or sometimes a narrative, you summarize with specific ideas. The vulture sits in the midground of the shot, hovering over the cowering child who lays with his face buried in the ground, on the ground. And that gives the image into the reader's head, and then you can analyze for the reason why you're presenting it. So we need more than 1 quote in that body paragraph. 1 source should be secondary, but the other 2 should be summarized bits of information. Are we making this 3 in each or 2 in each?
What do you want?
I think 2.
2's good.
2 is better. So 1 secondary and 1 summarized from the image. We'll put that up on the board. We'll post that. So you only need 2 pieces of evidence per body. That's 6 pieces of evidence altogether. 3 from the secondary, 3 from the image. Images should be summarized in the image by, give the summary. Obviously secondary needs to be introduced and cited properly. And then,
Those are wrong.
Yeah, as I say, we're not good with those dates because that was from the year we did that in the spring. This is an example that we gave you. This could be used, right, as one of the choices. But there's a link to an article, a contemporary article that brings us up to date on this issue. And here's some questions that we'd like you to consider. We don't have time necessarily to talk about it today. I know Canner wants to get some things done, and I want you guys to have time to look at the pictures and try to figure it out and go to this article and see this. If we're talking about historical information and context, secondary sources are defined differently than primary sources, right? Secondary comments on the primary. So if you look at this and say, well, would this be a valid secondary source? Is it a commentary that is not an opinion? Or is it one based in fact? Is it stated so that it's objective? Or is it objectively stated so that it gives you a point to an argument? Like just not saying, oh, and it's still going on today. Look, got some more Ku Klux Klan people walking around. But I think what you'll find in this article is different. It gives an historical and then brings us up to the present moment, and there are interviews, and even a couple, I think there's one scholar quoted in there or something. So think about what are the limits of your secondary source material, and it's really big. I mean, there's a lot to choose from out there.
The syllabus has dates for when the rough and final drafts are due. You don't need Miss Raymond or Mr. Blackburn for that. All right, the syllabus already has those dates. It's going to be a few weeks. It's probably closer to mid-September, like around senior retreat time.
Yeah.
And he already has the Orwell book right there in 1984. So if you haven't read that, you know, you want to do that too, because 1984 is going to be discussed with this paper in the background. Now, I'm going to post this video from the recording today. I will post the PowerPoint, obviously, so you have the images. I'm also going to post a couple of sample writings from students a couple years ago. Now, they resent them to me. These aren't the perfectly edited ones. I just made really quick marks on them. Hey, you're using far too many linking verbs, or you need to be in the present tense. All right, those rules for academic writing still apply. You're in the present tense, and you're eliminating linking verbs to make your voice much stronger to the reader. Okay, I will get all that posted before I leave today around 5 o'clock.
And just makes sense what Mr. Canner is saying, because whereas this is something we have to do for Eastfield, it is for an English 1301 class, and so part of it is for the accreditors to see, are they teaching the curriculum that they say they're teaching? So since standard English grammar and sentence structure and all that are part of that, we need to make sure. Grammarly, do you guys know about Grammarly? Okay, good.
Very quickly, before I take this camera off and try to upload it in 15 minutes if possible, are there any questions, keeping in mind that all this will be uploaded? Question over here. Yes, sir.
Can you find your own image, or do you have to use those?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Can he find his own image?
If
Or
you
must he
bring it-
use those
If
7
you
or
bring
8?
it to us, I think we've done that in the past. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have an image that you believe is equally as powerful,
Yeah.
just get it approved first.